Out of the big four railways, the Great Western was perhaps the most dedicated to standardizing their steam fleet, making them not only easier to build, but to run and maintain too. Ease of maintenance was a big priority for the railway, and so naturally, during the hardships of the 1940s, they wanted to invest in engines that would not only be powerful, but easy to keep running too. You'd think then, with such a commitment to standardization, that these engines would be fairly uniform machines. But not only were they unique, but also underwhelming. By the early 1940s, Britain's railway network was being pushed to its limits, moving wartime goods and supplies. Some engines were running 24/7 and it was very hard to service them quickly in order to keep them going, shunting engines especially. Naturally, a powerful engine that could be easily maintained was something many railways wanted, and in 1944 Frederick Hawkesworth designed an 060 engine that fit the bill. It was essentially a Great Western 9400 class locomotive, but with outside cylinders, a tighter wheelbase and Walschaerts valve gear. The idea being that they could work for 24 hours and be serviced in a siding quickly instead of needing to be serviced over a pit. For some reason, however, likely wartime shortages, these engines wouldn't be built for another 5 years. Their role as hard-working, easy-to-repair shunters being taken by the Hunslet austerity saddle tanks and the American S100s. By 1949, however, British Railways decided to try out the design and had 10 built at Swindon Works. The final result was a batch of unusual-looking engines, considering their Great Western heritage, each with 17.5 by 24-inch cylinders, standard number 10 boilers, 4-foot 7.5-inch driving wheels, a tractive effort of 22,515 pounds, and a very tight wheelbase of 12 foot 10 inches. Strangely, they didn't have a running plate above their wheels, and rather than riveted, many parts were welded together instead. Despite their similarities, it seems that Hawkesworth wasn't directly inspired by the S100s, but more that the design came about as a means of refining the Pannier tanks into a standard, versatile engine that could not only shunt in tighter goods yards, but also occasionally pull short-distance trains while being easier to service. They were classified as the 1500s, but upon being brought into service, it was found that they weren't as versatile as first thought. Although being relatively stripped down compared to other Panniers, the 1500s were a few tons heavier and a little taller than their 9400 counterparts, restricting their route availability and the yards they could work in. On top of that, it's said that because of their shorter wheelbase, the engines would swivel side to side at higher speeds, making them unideal for hauling goods or passenger services as their speed needed to be limited to stop them derailing. They were also unbalanced too, as their big cylinders at the front and smaller cabs at the back caused them to be quite front-heavy, with more weight resting on the front wheels than the rear. Most of them worked as shunters around Paddington Station moving empty carriages, a job at which they excelled at. A couple worked at Southall Shed and Didcot shunting and pulling short-distance goods, and a few worked around Newport in Wales. While they exceeded as shunters, their lack of promised versatility was enough for British Railways to not pursue building anymore, but it seems however that the failure of the 1500s may not have entirely been their fault. The swivelling, for example, may have been more to do with driver error than the engines, as number 1501, which has survived into preservation, has proven to be a smooth and reliable runner at the Severn Valley Railway when driven properly, even when travelling at relatively high speeds. In fairness, many of the Great Western drivers were used to inside cylinder tank engines with longer, more sturdy wheelbases, so an outside cylinder, short wheelbased engine would take a little getting used to. Their heavy, clumsy nature combined with the availability of so many other proven shunting engine designs available to British Railways just made building any more 1500s pointless. Even the 9400s, while not quite as powerful, were still reliably doing the same work and could easily pull goods and passenger trains when needed. Not to mention the 5700s, of which BR had over 800 at their disposal, were just as powerful while also being lighter and more sure-footed. And with the ever-growing number of diesel shunters appearing to replace steam anyway that could run 24 hours easily, the cards were truly stacked against the 1500s from the beginning. The only thing they really had going for them was how easy they were to service compared to standard panniers, but this was a faint silver lining in a very dark cloud. In the end, the 10 that were built remained the only ones in existence, and by 1959 they were starting to be withdrawn. Numbers 1501, 1502 and 1509 were sold to the National Coal Board in 1961, while the rest were scrapped by 1963. The Coal Board engines had a tough time at their new job. Though capable of doing the work, their rough-riding nature was made even worse by the poorly maintained rails they rode on. So bad were the working conditions that by the time they were retired, it was found that their rear wheels had carved grooves into the sides of their fireboxes from just how much they'd shook around. In 1970, engine 1501 was purchased for preservation along with various parts from 1502 and 1509 to be used as spares for restoration before they were scrapped. 1501 has since found a home at the Severn Valley Railway and has proven to be a smooth and reliable runner despite the problematic reputation the class held. Considering the uniform locomotive history the Great Western had, the 1500s were certainly an odd design to end their legacy with. Despite their rough and clumsy nature, they were fundamentally functional engines, and compared to their counterparts, an interesting break from the mould. There's plenty to discuss about these machines, but whether or not they were rubbish through and through, or simply just victims of bad press and poor timing, well, I'll leave that up for you to decide. Subscribe for more.